Hi, my name is Andrew Ambrosius and welcome to another episode of the Art of Business English. It's great to have you all here today, and what are we going to look at? Well, I would like to look at the age-old craft of communicating through pen on paper. But whereas nowadays, as most of us are fully aware, we are putting fingers to keyboards or fingers to tactile screens. And even though the technology may have changed, the art still remains the same. And in this podcast, we're going to look at some of the do's and don'ts for sending emails. Now, as a non-native speaker, you're going to have to get used to the fact that you will need to do the following religiously. And what I mean by religiously is that every time you write an email, you should apply these following tips. Now, the first thing you should do is you should plan what you're going to write. By planning ahead, we are able to produce very concise and clear written communication, and it also helps us to structure our ideas and think about what we are going to say. Now, the purpose of planning, or a good way to start planning, is to think about what is the message that I would like to transmit to the reader, okay? This also depends on what style or the purpose of the email. So yes, the first thing we need to consider is the message. What are we trying to transmit to the reader? And by doing this, I mean, the message will depend a lot on what is the purpose of the email, okay? So what are you trying to get the other person to do, okay? Are you trying to get them to complete a task, or are you trying to get them to provide you with some information? So there are many different email styles, and we do have a blog post on the Art of Business English website that looks at some of the language for different email styles, and I encourage you to look at that. Now, the next step that you need to do is you need to error check your writing at least twice. In order to do that, I recommend doing the following. You can write as you go and check as you go. So you do one paragraph, you write one paragraph, and then you check it. And then you move on to the second paragraph, and then you check the first and the second paragraph, okay? So you're continually reviewing the writing as you go. You will make mistakes. If you're writing in your non-native language, you will definitely make mistakes. It's just a part of being a non-native. It took me 1 year of my wife correcting my emails before I could comfortably send them on my own. And even to this day, I still make mistakes. So it does take me longer to write in Spanish than it does in English. And I encourage you to do the same if you're writing in English and it's not your native language. You must check. You will find mistakes. I always find mistakes. And I mean, this is a technique that native speakers should also use. You should always check your work before you send, okay? Even if you're writing in Spanish or English or whatever your native language may be. For example, nowadays with auto-correcting software on our phones, some strange things can happen with words. And I had a classic example today where I sent an email and I wanted to write separate, and the autocorrector corrected the word to espérate, which is Spanish for wait. So I had an English email with one word in Spanish. Now, the next step, which is important, is we should use a dictionary or a website to translate specific words or expressions. That is to say, I do not recommend trying to use Google or whatever to translate whole paragraphs okay, that will generally end badly and it will be very confusing. You need to trust your own knowledge of the language you're writing in, and then just try and polish it with some words that you maybe don't know, or some phrasal verb expressions that you don't know, that, maybe you have an expression in Spanish that you think would sound good, but if you translate it literally, it doesn't make sense. So it's better to check that first using word reference or Google, okay? But only translate individual words or very short expressions, okay? Now, if possible, in the next step, I would always get a native person to help you where possible. As I mentioned earlier, my wife corrected my emails, which was a very tiring and quite frustrating process, because obviously when you're a business person, you want to respond and reply to emails quickly and be productive. But if you have to rely on someone to help you check them, then this can slow down the process. But in saying that, it does allow you to learn very quickly and see your mistakes very quickly. And it also does provide a better image, okay? If you're sending emails to someone and the English is very unclear and with full of mistakes, it doesn't look very professional, okay? So the next step I also encourage is to use the KISS principle, which is basically to keep it simple, okay? We need to keep our writing as simple as possible. We don't need to elaborate and make it very long and use jargon and use fancy words. I think especially if you're writing as a non-native person, the simpler and the clearer, the better, okay? Until you get better, you will practice, okay? And as you practice, you will improve. But it's always good to keep it simple. And finally, you need to make sure that you're using the appropriate style. So this specifically relates to formal or informal expressions. And the tone, you need to be careful not to be too direct, because in Spanish, the style is very direct, okay? And this can often not go well in the English language. So let me just give you some examples. English speakers generally are quite polite, okay? Especially British English people. Of course, there are exceptions to all rules, okay? However, to give you some examples, in English, we would walk into a coffee shop and ask the waiter, "Could I have a coffee, please?" Okay, that's quite polite. You're using could instead of can, which is more direct. And of course, you're using please, and it's a question. In Spanish, you might say, "Hola, quiero un cortado, por favor." If you say, "Hola, quiero un cortado, por favor," in Spanish, it sounds fine, okay? However, if we do translate this to English, then it would be, "Hello, I want a coffee, please." Now, it's not rude per se. However, want is very direct. And this can sound a bit rude in English. We don't say "I want something" generally, especially when we're being polite and asking for something. So we must be sensitive to these differences, especially when we're writing to colleagues, okay, in other countries, and using English. If we are too direct, it can sound quite rude. So what I would like to do then is to look firstly at the things that you should not do, and then I'll move on in the last part of this podcast to look at the things that you should do, okay? So, and I've seen these all in my time as a teacher. Some of them will seem quite logical. However, I'm sure most of you are guilty of doing one or two of these things. So the first thing that you should not do is send an email with no subject, okay? No subject line. Receiving an email with no subject line, it's a bit disorientating and confusing. That's the first thing. It seems unprofessional, secondly. And thirdly, it doesn't allow you to search back at a later date and find that email. I mean, if you do not have a subject line, the person who's searching for that email will only be able to rely on the date. Okay, so very important. Make sure you give your email a very clear subject line that specifically relates to the topic and the purpose of that email. Okay. The second thing you should not do is send an email with an attachment and no message in the body. This is quite common. People often do this when they scan a document and it attaches directly to an email. It's rude to send an email with no message in the body. Okay. Sometimes in our haste to do things quickly, we think it's okay to send an email with no message in the body. However, it's a little bit disconcerting to receive an email without even a hello or a goodbye. So I would definitely recommend always just putting a quick 1 or 2 line message in the body. Okay, it seems much more professional and it's more polite. Okay, and the third thing that you should not do is send an email with a 1-line question and no hello or polite greeting. Often nowadays, in our haste to do things and then our desire to be more productive, or because we're busy, we just send or fire, as we say, a quick email to someone with a question. And often those questions can be quite direct. So it's much more polite to have a little greeting like, hello, Mary, it's Andrew here. Or hello, Mary. Now, I was just wondering, could you please help me with this? Okay. This is much more polite than just saying, Mary, I wanted to know this, boom. Okay. Or not even Mary, just, I wanted to know this. What's the answer to this? This is far too direct. Okay. And it's nice to receive an email with the correct formalities. Now, the fourth point, which you should not do, is you should never send an email without a farewell remark, okay? Regards, Andrew, okay? You should always sign off and say farewell to the person that you're sending the email to. It's just one word often, like regards, or in this case, or 2 words, best wishes, or thanks again. These little things make a big difference, and they help you to come across as a much more professional and caring individual, as opposed to someone who just fires emails and fires orders and instructions at people. And the final thing that you should never do is not write in the style and tone that the situation dictates. Okay? Some people are way too formal or way too informal. Generally, the latter, way too informal in situations. Remember, you need to evaluate and plan the email first and think about what is the style, what is the tone, what is the situation. And these thoughts will help you to write in the correct style. And writing in the correct style is using the correct language, so whether it's formal or informal. Okay, as I said earlier, we have a blog post on the Art of Business English with some expressions for improving and writing your English more formally. So now I'd like to move on to the next part, and these are the things that you should do. Okay, we should always say hi and thank the sender for their email, okay? Obviously, if you are replying back and forth, you don't need to thank the person for their email every single time you receive it. But when you first receive an email on a new topic, always thank the person for their email. If you know the person, you should make small talk where necessary. I think this is quite British, but for example, if you are sending an email to someone you know on a Monday morning, it's logical to quickly ask them how their weekend was, or to tell them, I hope you had a nice weekend. This is very polite, and it shows that you're interested in that person and not just going straight to work, being too direct. Okay, it's very nice to start an email with a little bit of small talk. Okay, even though the person is not in front of you. Okay, so I highly recommend just thanking the person for their email, and at appropriate times, a little bit of small talk, especially with people that you know. The next thing is also to use the correct greeting. So this will also be dictated by whether or not it's a formal or informal email. And, nowadays people are less formal. So if you know the person, you can use their first name. You don't need to continue saying Mr. Hayes or Mrs. Smith. Okay, you can call her Judy, or you can call him John. It all depends on, again, the style and tone which the situation dictates, and that goes back to planning the email in the beginning. Now, you also should use polite language, such as conditionals where possible. As I mentioned earlier, if you say to someone, can you help me with this? It is more direct than saying, could you help me with this? If we use conditional language like this, it can help to soften the message and make your email sound more polite and less direct. Okay? I mean, the message is the same. You're asking for help. However, you're doing it in a more polite way. So, where possible, try and use polite language and conditionals. Okay? For example, when you finish an email, you should say, I look forward to hearing you. This is much more polite. Or I look forward to seeing you. This is much more polite than see you soon. Okay? So again, it depends on what the situation is and the style and tone of the email. And finally, we need to be clear in outlining what the purpose of the email is. Okay? With all writing, and generally with most things, especially, you can apply this to marketing, you can apply this to many areas of business. What is the purpose? What are we trying to achieve? So when we do write, we should always think of the end result first and then work back from there. What am I trying to achieve with this email? What is the purpose of this email? And once we have that clear, then it's much easier to write the email in a structured way with a clear introduction and clear points in the body, and then your conclusion. So those are my AOBE points to consider, do's and don'ts for writing emails in the appropriate styles. And well, that's all I have time for today. But I hope that this list of do's and don'ts has helped. Be sure to check out the accompanying blog post over at the AOBE website. It has tips on expressions to use for writing formal and informal email. As always, if you like this episode, be sure to subscribe and share it with your friends. Okay, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of The Art of Business English. Thanks. Bye for now.